as you mentioned it. If you have to guarantee that you're going to work broadly, you're going to have communication. And I think if you don't have a communication that really allows you to track down, to give the student the opportunity of communicating with you, have a real process of a company, it's going to be hard to get the effect. But I still think that you can round that up with technology. The most important thing to assure quality is to really filter the content and guarantee that the content is good. I think the risk is in the content more than in the technology as a whole. Technology can be managed better than the content itself. So it's an interesting combination in terms of, if you have the right content, then guarantee that what you're using in terms of technology and the methodology that you're putting up and all the pedagogy that you are effectively combining should guarantee that the content will be well delivered.
Whose role is it, though, to assure that quality? Is that a government role? Is it a transnational body? Is it the way we do it now?
I think that as a process, if you want to actually assure quality in a process, you have various stages. In our case, our government is heavily regulating distance education, and funny enough, it doesn't do the same for the face-to-face. If you compare it, it's unfair. And in my view, instead of promoting a constructive process of seeing what is being done, getting best practices, and spreading it, they have adopted a punishment approach, which is not good for something which is actually emerging as a promise to access to good education. So I think government should have a role, but in our case, we are having a role which in the stage where the process is, it's not helping us out. So maybe we should put, the associations and the schools, etc., should put more pressure to participate in the process and see how you can actually build a quality assured process. I can actually give you an example which is very similar. Everybody here will remember when the ISO 9000 certificates came up, right? So all of a sudden, people thought that, from tomorrow onwards, once you have a certified process, you can actually have quality. And we know that doesn't work, right? You have to build quality. And it's all, I think government has an important role in the beginning, but it should be a role of constructing the process. And then once it's stabilized and it's got its own momentum, I think that the normal forces do their jobs. Yeah.
I agree. I think governments have a very definite role, but it's not about controlling, but about providing the right kind of environment for quality to emerge. And there are any number of models. I think the national qualification agencies or national accreditation agencies certainly have a role in both providing policy guidelines as well as implementation aspects of it. I think we're moving more or less from a traditional input-based model to an outcome-based model of quality assurance. And as we begin to do that, I think views of stakeholders will become terribly important. And I think such agencies would have to recognize that that has to be taken into account. At the end of the day, I think quality has to be driven by those people who are in that industry. Mm-hmm. We have to own quality. I don't think we could look at quality. Quality could be imposed upon us, especially this industry. And I have a terrible anger against rankings and the whole, newspaper industries beginning to take a major role in this, and politicians are beginning to subscribe to that kind of situation. It's horrible. Anyway.
Is there a role for an international body as opposed to the national bodies? As education becomes a more worldwide pursuit, collaborative, as we put it.
International bodies are stakeholders. I think this particular body certainly has an interest in how distance education is perceived, or open distance learning is perceived and used and received by communities. And therefore, yes, I think providing benchmarks, which we all learn from each other. So I think that is this role.
Do you think there'd be, and I'll put this question to you, Susan, the resistance on the national level to that sort of international overview of quality in education?
Well, I think each country has their own licensing processes and quality standards. I mean, I think that bodies like ICDE and others certainly have the ability to come up with some transnational quality standards. What we're seeing today are many for-profit corporations that are exporting education around the world, and there are no guidelines around which we can either hold them accountable or give them suggestions around the qualifications that they should have for licensing. So in some cases, the licensing inside the country for the state-run or state-funded institutions are higher than the ones from out of state or from out of country. And so I think the difficulty these days is that with online education, it can be exported around the world and it can be and not have the oversight of some of the licensing bodies. So I do think there should be some transnational quality standards established.
That is one of the themes that came out of Professor Gurley's address, is the blurring of the boundaries between public and the private for-profit sector. Greater demand for post-secondary education has attracted the private sector in a great way into the role traditionally reserved for universities. Professor Gurley seems to think this is a positive development in many respects. They're nimble, they're quick, they adapt quickly to the market. Universities, it could be argued, don't. Do you see it as a positive development? I'll put it, Stavros, to you.
No, I do think so. I think because if you can have more effectiveness on resources put into the industry. Now, what's the public-private balance? And that's very hard to think. But I can take the example in our country. Massively, I think the ratio that Professor Petagna puts in is 1 to 3. In our country, we probably put up that average because the public institutions in our country have maybe 1/10 of the students, little less than 1/10 of the students. So I come from a culture where higher education is practically a privately owned sector, and the challenge is, on the one hand, it helps provide education because the state doesn't have enough infrastructure and it doesn't put enough effort of resources to have education for all. And on the other hand, we have quality problems because the directives. So in the recent years, they've set up national exams in terms of students take an exam when they come into the program, and then they have to take an exam after they finish. And they're trying to see effectiveness of teaching and stuff like that, and they auditing. So in terms of national standards, we are developing. But if it weren't for the private money to come into the education, we would have a very, very slow development in terms of higher education in the country.
But my take on the subject, I think it's definitely a development that is happening, but we cannot assume that all private entities